So Camilla is sitting in a courtroom, and in one single sentence, every title she's used since Charles became king gets declared completely invalid. Not suspended, not under review, just gone, like they never legally existed. And the most uncomfortable part of the whole thing isn't even the legal ruling itself. It's the fact that the evidence that brought her down didn't come from some outside Republican group or a random lawsuit. It came from inside the palace walls, and the people who knew the truth said nothing for months. That's where this story gets genuinely strange. Before we unpack this, make sure to hit subscribe on Monarch Access so you don't miss the next update. Alright, let's get into it. The scene in that courtroom was apparently dead silent. Not the kind of dramatic gasp and shout silence you see in movies, but the real heavy kind where everyone in the room understands something irreversible just happened. Camilla was sitting there beside the royal legal team. And when the Privy Council's representative stood up and confirmed the ruling, she didn't react with visible anger. She reached for the printed judgment, read the first paragraph twice, and kept her fingers pressed against the page. What made it worse was that moments later, an usher addressed her without any royal title at all. Not as a slight, not as an insult, but because legally there was nothing to call her. The Privy Council, which is the formal body that advises the sovereign on state matters, had declared that Queen Consort and every related ceremonial designation had never been properly confirmed. Palace offices, the royal household, and even the court circular, which is the official daily record of royal engagements, were ordered to stop using those titles immediately. Not in a few weeks, not after an appeal. Immediately. Charles leaned toward her and promised the palace would challenge the decision, but the people present said his voice carried way more anger than actual certainty. And then came this small moment that apparently meant everything. When his solicitor asked whether the king wished to object, Charles hesitated, just a pause. But in a room full of people who read body language for a living, that pause mattered. As a husband, he just watched the woman beside him, stripped of an identity he had fought for years to secure. As a sovereign, he understood that defying the court could make the crown look afraid of its own rules. And the judgment struck harder because royal titles usually feel permanent. Tradition, ceremony, years of public use, all of it had made Camilla's position seem completely settled. But the court ruled that repetition cannot repair a missing legal confirmation. You can print a title on programs and warrants and invitations for a decade, but if the original approval was never sealed, none of that usage counts. Every appearance, every appointment, every household decision linked to those titles would now be reviewed. And Camilla understood the danger immediately. This wasn't just about what she'd be called tomorrow. It threatened the authority attached to everything she had done yesterday. Now here's where it shifts from a legal blow to something more personal. The court confirmed that someone inside the royal household had exposed the missing approval and forced the issue into formal proceedings. This didn't leak by accident. Someone knew the paperwork was incomplete, kept quiet for months, and then made sure the right people saw the evidence. As the royal party prepared to leave, Charles received a handwritten note from his legal advisor. It contained 3 names: Princess Anne, Prince William, and the former keeper of the Privy Seal, the official once responsible for safeguarding key state documents. The king looked across the courtroom at his son. William lowered his eyes and gave him nothing. The titles had fallen in a single sentence, but the deeper wound was the growing suspicion that the challenge had not come from outside the monarchy at all. Behind the courtroom doors, the legal language disappeared and the actual human damage began. Camilla was no longer confronting judges or statutes or sealed instruments. She was confronting the possibility that the family she had spent decades trying to enter had never truly accepted her place. Charles wanted to defend her. William wanted to protect the crown and wanted the rules obeyed. Those 3 loyalties collided around one devastated woman who had just been told her royal identity never legally existed. Camilla felt the loss of something far deeper than rank. Her titles had been the public proof that decades of scandal, rejection, and sacrifice had finally ended in acceptance. A royal title, the formal name that defines a person's place within the monarchy, had given her legitimacy before the country. Now every ceremony she endured and every compromise she made could be recast as service performed under authority she had never lawfully possessed. Charles carried a different wound. He had treated her recognition as one of the defining victories of his reign, genuinely believing that placing her beside him would settle years of bitterness. Instead, the judgment suggested that his determination had pushed caution aside and exposed the crown to disgrace. When William entered the consultation room, he found his father alone beside a table covered in legal papers. The prince closed the door and told him that protecting the monarchy could not mean pretending the ruling didn't exist. Charles heard constitutional advice, meaning guidance about the rules governing royal power, as betrayal from his eldest son. Anne met Camilla in a side corridor shortly after. Camilla asked whether she had known the challenge was coming. The princess admitted that questions had been raised but insisted she had not controlled the ruling. Her calmness only sharpened the pain. Camilla accused her of caring more about procedure than dignity, and Anne answered that dignity built on uncertain authority could never remain secure. That's a brutal line when you really think about it. She was essentially saying that the humiliation of the courtroom was inevitable because the foundation was already cracked. Then William admitted something that changed the entire conversation. He had seen an unsigned legal warning months earlier. The document said the title arrangement depended on language that had never been formally sealed, meaning officially approved and made valid. He had urged a private investigation, but Charles's advisors dismissed it as embarrassing and unnecessary. That confession landed like a grenade. Camilla's private secretary then disclosed through a documented internal account that several title files had been removed from her household archive before the case began. A senior royal access code authorized the removal. Someone had hidden the danger from her while quietly preparing for its collapse. Charles finally asked whether William's concern was truly constitutional or still connected to Diana. The future king paused, then answered that the case began with documents, but the family silence began much earlier. To understand why the titles collapsed in court, the family would have to return to the exact night when a private royal ceremony turned into a constitutional point of no return. And that night happened 11 months earlier during a private Windsor ceremony that was never listed in the court circular. A velvet case was opened. A declaration was placed before the king, and Camilla was asked to sign beside a title the Privy Council had not yet approved. Everyone in that room understood the danger. Yet one advisor moved the pen toward her anyway, and one silent witness decided that the moment could never remain buried. Charles had arranged the private Windsor investiture dinner to settle Camilla's authority without another public battle. Only senior household figures attended. No announcement followed. Yet the declaration named her queen in sovereign household authority, a designation giving influence over appointments, royal residences, charitable patronages, and access to private family collections. Anne read the final page and stopped. She asked who had approved the phrase sovereign household authority. The king answered that the wording reflected his wife's place beside him. The princess set the document down and warned that affection could not create constitutional power. Her words struck Charles as a challenge to both his judgment and his marriage. Camilla watched his face harden, knowing that retreat would make her appear uncertain before the one family member least willing to ignore procedure. Camilla turned to her husband and quietly asked whether he was certain. He placed his hand over hers and promised that every approval had already been secured. She wanted to trust him. She also refused to let any doubt show, so she signed. That single movement became the point of no return because the declaration was later used to justify decisions that reached far beyond ceremonial status. One witness understood the danger immediately. The former keeper of the Privy Seal, the official responsible for protecting documents carrying formal state approval, discovered that his office's mark had been reproduced without permission. He secretly retained a copy and recorded his findings in a sealed memorandum. The account stated plainly that the dinner had attempted to create authority the council had never granted. Weeks later, Camilla's household cited the declaration to alter several royal patronages. William's office objected, and Anne demanded its withdrawal. A senior advisor instead ordered staff to treat it as binding and hide the file from routine circulation. After the keeper's death, his memorandum reached the Privy Council, and the court with the original approval register attached. The space beside Camilla's title was blank. That blank space exposed everything. But inside the palace, Charles and Camilla were preparing to confront the two people they believed had allowed that truth to escape. Charles did not summon William and Anne to discuss legal strategy. He summoned them to demand an answer. With no aides, secretaries, or lawyers present, the four figures stood inside a locked Windsor drawing room while the court's judgment lay open between them. The king pointed at the final page, then at his son, and asked the question that ended any pretense of family unity. Did you help them destroy her, or did you simply stand aside? Camilla had insisted on attending despite advisors urging her to rest. William arrived first. Anne entered moments later carrying the disputed declaration in a plain folder. Its presence made one thing clear. This meeting would not stay personal for long. Charles wanted loyalty and an appeal. His wife wanted the name of whoever exposed the papers. The prince wanted the palace to accept the ruling before public trust collapsed. The princess wanted every decision made under the declaration reviewed. Charles turned on his son first. He demanded to know whether William had given evidence to the Privy Council. The future king answered that he had submitted no accusation, but when questioned in a recorded legal interview, he refused to support an account he knew was false. The monarch struck the table with his palm. To him, constitutional duty had become an excuse for abandoning his father when humiliation was greatest. Camilla then faced Anne. She asked why the danger to her titles had never been made clear. Anne reminded her that she had challenged the wording at Windsor publicly. When Camilla said she trusted her husband, Anne answered softly. Trust could explain the signature. It could not make the signature lawful. Then the folder opened and placed two versions of the declaration side by side. The first used cautious ceremonial language. The second, signed by Camilla, contained the disputed authority clause. Digital records showed that Charles's senior constitutional advisor had inserted it less than an hour before the dinner. Camilla turned toward the king and asked whether he had known. Charles hesitated. That silence moved her anger away from William and Anne and toward the man who had promised every legal detail was settled. William then produced a document obtained during court disclosure. It ordered staff to secure recognition through continued usage. The handwriting belonged to someone still serving at the heart of the royal household. The family had entered the room believing the court had humiliated Camilla, but they left realizing that the greater betrayal may have come from the advisors who built her crown on unstable ground. The judgment appeared to be about Camilla, but the machinery behind her titles reached far beyond one woman. Senior advisors had spent years turning repetition into legitimacy, placing the same words on programs, warrants, invitations, and official correspondence until questioning them seemed impossible. Yet behind closed doors, the Privy Council held the power the palace could not command. When its members examined the original register, they discovered not an innocent mistake, but a calculated attempt to make ceremony outrun the law. Charles could grant honors and shape the identity of his household, but recognition demanded more than preference. A constitutional instrument was an official document giving legal force to a decision, while a seal confirmed that the authority had approved it. The Privy Council protected continuity by ensuring that private wishes could not quietly become public law. That safeguard mattered because once royal power touched appointments, residences, or national institutions, affection was no longer enough. The palace strategy had been simple. Charles's advisors printed Camilla's title on everything until repetition began to look like legitimacy. They believed custom would eventually silence every technical objection. Sir Jonathan Vale, the king's constitutional secretary, exposed that method during a recorded testimony. When council members showed him the blank register, he removed his cufflinks and placed them beside the papers. Knowing his career had ended, Vale admitted that he authorized continued usage because Charles found the thought of another public argument over Camilla unbearable. He believed he was protecting both the monarch and the woman beside him. Instead, he had built their security on a missing approval. When the king later read the documented testimony alone, he pressed both hands against his forehead. His household had not merely made an error, it had broken procedure because no one felt able to tell him no. The deeper discovery was even more dangerous. The disputed declaration had attempted to grant Camilla influence over household appointments, private collections, and crown residences. A crown residence is a property used for official royal duties, not simply a private family home. Invalidating the titles therefore dismantled the structure of authority. The council issued binding restrictions immediately. Camilla could no longer approve appointments, direct staff under a former designation, or use seals linked to it. Before Charles could decide on an appeal, departments began obeying. A state reception was rewritten overnight. Her place in the formal procession disappeared, and her office received orders to destroy every sheet of royal letterhead carrying the invalid title. The decision had moved beyond legal theory, and by sunrise, Camilla would see her former position disappearing not in speeches but in the small, merciless details of palace life. The first consequence arrived before breakfast. A footman entered Camilla's sitting room carrying 2 silver trays. One held her morning correspondence. The other held every sheet of official stationery removed from her office during the night. The embossed title at the top of each page had been crossed through for destruction. She lifted one envelope, traced the lettering with her thumb, and asked whether the order came from the king. The footman lowered his eyes. It had come directly from the court. Camilla watched her former identity disappear line by line. Palace departments removed the titles from websites, schedules, correspondence templates, and ceremonial papers, while staff were ordered to use a temporary designation approved by the court. That designation was simply a lawful form of address used until Charles and the Privy Council agreed on something permanent. The change mattered because every public word now signaled that her authority had collapsed. Sophie received instructions to lead the Commonwealth reception receiving line, while Anne took over several official presentations. The receiving line is the formal order in which senior royals welcome guests. Palace officials called the changes procedural, but no one mistook their meaning. Camilla entered the gallery and saw that her chair beside Charles had been removed and placed among family members with no official role. She stared at the empty space until an aide quietly asked whether she wished to withdraw. Charles arrived moments later and ordered the chair restored. The Lord Chamberlain, the senior official who organizes royal ceremonies, explained that obeying him would violate the court's ruling. The king gripped the chair, then let it go. Staff had just watched a royal command fail. The damage spread. 2 senior officials resigned after learning that decisions signed under Camilla's invalid title would be reviewed. A documented internal statement from one advisor confirmed that staff had been warned months earlier not to discuss the missing approval. She finally understood that others had known the foundation was unstable while allowing her to stand upon it. Then a charity returned an appointment letter bearing her old designation. It requested lawful confirmation from another royal authority. Her influence had not merely been embarrassed, it had become unusable. Camilla removed her ceremonial brooch, placed it on the dressing table, and requested a private car. She did not ask for Charles. She asked to meet William alone before the reception began that evening. After days of accusation and resistance, Camilla was no longer searching for someone to blame. She was searching for the one person who could tell her whether any place remained for her inside the monarchy. There were no lawyers in the room when Camilla faced William. No court seals, no prepared statements, and no titles spoken aloud. She sat opposite him inside a small Clarence House library and asked a question, stripped of ceremony. "Did you want this to happen?" William did not answer immediately. He looked toward the closed door, then back at the woman his father had fought to place beside him. What followed did not restore her crown, but it changed the direction of the crisis. Camilla had chosen Clarence House because she wanted nowhere to hide. The residence was Charles's long-standing London home, but this room held no officials and no formal record of their words. She dismissed her secretary before William arrived, while the prince instructed his security team to remain outside. That mattered because every earlier conversation had been filtered through advisors, legal language, and old family wounds. Now only two people remained, each carrying a different version of the same pain. William knew the decision could split the family completely. Charles still wanted an appeal, a formal request asking a higher authority to reverse the ruling because years of public use had made Camilla's titles seem settled. The future king believed that argument would deepen the humiliation and suggest the monarchy considered itself above its own rules. She understood that choosing either path could determine whether father and son broke apart in public. Camilla finally admitted what frightened her most. She could survive losing a title, she told him, but not being remembered as a woman who knowingly stole one. Her voice broke as she explained that Charles had assured her every approval was complete. For once, she did not defend the disputed declaration or accuse Diana's memory of shaping William's judgment. William answered with equal honesty. He had never wanted her publicly destroyed, nor had he asked the council to invalidate her title. Yet once the altered document emerged, silence would have made him part of the deception. His history with her had made the choice painful, but the crown had to survive their private resentment. Then Camilla produced a handwritten assurance from Charles's senior advisor. The note preserved in her personal files stated that council approval had already been secured before the Windsor dinner. It proved she had been misled. Camilla told William she would release the note, accept the judgment, and end the appeal. In return, she asked for one thing. The palace must stop presenting the crisis as her attempt to seize power. He agreed and offered to support a lawful designation recognizing her only as the king's wife. The turning point had come not from victory in court but from Camilla's decision to abandon the battle. And Charles was about to learn that the wife he tried to protect would no longer let him fight in her name. By morning, the private decision had become a national reckoning. Newspaper presses ran through the night. Broadcasters abandoned their schedules and crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace beneath screens repeating the same extraordinary sentence. Camilla would not appeal. Yet the image that defined the day was not a headline or television graphic. It was a palace worker removing the word Queen from a public notice board while hundreds watched in absolute silence, their phones raised as a royal era visibly ended. Buckingham Palace confirmed that Camilla accepted the court's determination and surrendered every authority attached to the invalid titles. The statement said she had relied on formal assurances from senior advisors and had not knowingly acted outside the constitutional process. That distinction mattered because the country was no longer judging only what she had done, but whether she had understood the danger. Charles answered with reforms. He ordered an independent review of title procedures, household warrants, and private declarations. A household warrant is an official instruction carrying royal authority. William and Anne would oversee the review with constitutional experts, making clear that the next chapter of the monarchy would rely less on private promises and more on recorded approval. Outside the palace, the nation found its own verdict. As the notice came down, an elderly woman lowered her Union flag and told a broadcaster in a recorded interview that no one should be humiliated, but no one should be above the rules. The sentence spread across evening coverage. Some saw Camilla as the victim of advisors and a husband desperate to force acceptance. Others saw overdue accountability. Diana's memory returned to the debate along with every old question about forgiveness, loyalty, and Charles's battle for public trust. Then the decisive note was published. The Privy Council released the advisor's written assurance confirming that Camilla had been falsely told every approval was complete. Public anger shifted away from her and toward a palace culture that had treated royal preference as stronger than scrutiny. Sir Jonathan Vail resigned that afternoon. Charles accepted the resignation in a brief recorded meeting, closed the red dispatch box holding the disputed papers, and refused the offered handshake. Loyalty without truth damaged everyone it claimed to protect, the king said. The palace then announced that Charles and Camilla would appear together that evening, not as monarch and disputed consort, but as husband and wife before the final settlement was signed. The public had seen the title removed, the evidence exposed, and the advisor dismissed. Only one question remained, not whether Camilla would regain her crown, but how she and Charles would live after losing it. When Charles entered the final council chamber, he carried no appeal papers. Camilla walked beside him without a crown, without the disputed title, and without the authority that had divided the family. Yet she did not appear defeated. She had chosen truth over a ceremonial victory that could never again feel secure. Before the assembled council, the king placed his pen beside the withdrawal order, looked toward his wife, and accepted the verdict that would define both his marriage and his reign. Charles signed away every challenge to the judgment. The Privy Council confirmed that the disputed titles were permanently invalid and could not be revived through public use. Camilla would be recognized as the king's wife and royal companion without sovereign power or independent household control. The settlement preserved her place beside him, while ending the authority that had pushed the monarchy toward disgrace. Every decision made under the false declaration now faced review. Valid charitable acts were approved again through lawful channels, while disputed appointments were cancelled. The Windsor Declaration was voided and placed in the Royal Archives, the protected collection of royal records, as a warning that personal wishes could never replace approval. Charles then cleared the chamber. Alone with Camilla, he admitted that fear had driven him. He wanted certainty because he believed the country might never accept their marriage. In trying to protect her, the monarch had tried to control the outcome. She answered that protection became dangerous the moment truth was treated as an enemy. Camilla removed the title card from her writing desk and placed it inside the archival folder herself. Sadness remained, but so did relief. Her future beside Charles would no longer depend on disputed papers, inflated authority, or officials forced to obey. William entered after their conversation. The king did not apologize for loving his wife, and the prince did not apologize for defending the law. They agreed that the crown must never again force a family member to choose between loyalty and honesty. Their peace was restrained, but real. Anne offered the final verdict. She told Camilla that accepting defeat had protected her dignity more than any appeal could have done. Camilla admitted that the warning at Windsor had been right and extended her hand. Anne took it. The court had invalidated Camilla's titles, but history delivered the deeper judgment. The crown remained strongest, not when it protected every royal desire, but when even the king accepted that truth must stand above him.